Hi, the review of the day is for Simak, Clifford D. Simak, Immigrant and Other Stories, which I bought in pursuit of my goal to read more short stories in SFF, because it's origin story for science fiction, especially in the US, I believe, is mainly short stories. Anyhow, Simak Clifford D is a great author. I've got over a dozen of his books. I think you might be able to see some of them on the shelf behind me-ish. Never mind. Now, as always, I've got a Mandarin copy. They did a lot of those ones with the Simak, with the pyramid instead of the A in his title. I don't mind them. The actual image is suitably alienistic, science fiction-y, a bit weird, and kind of relates to at least one or two of the stories inside. Actually, three of the stories inside, obviously. Always hard to rate a short story collection. There's always going to be better ones, there's always going to be worse ones. And the stories in this collection range from 2 stars to 4 stars in my personal estimation, which is what I'm reviewing. And I probably am going to be a bit spoilery, but not too spoilery, if you can even spoilery short stories that are from, I don't know, the 60s and 70s. Yeah, the earliest one is from, in fact, 1954 by the look of it. Can't spoil that. Okay, so Simak is one of those grand science fiction writers who learned his trade through newspapers or reporting. I don't recognise the names of either of the publications that he's meant to have been involved in, but it was a good result. There's a very enthusiastic introduction and long introduction by Francis Lyall. I'm not too sure who Francis Lyall is. I think it's a United Kingdom author because he's writing from Scotland. I did find a book by someone with a similar name online. I'm not certain. Tell me if you know. If you're from the United Kingdom, you might know. Anyway, he goes into the topography of Simak's youth in rural America, Wisconsin, maybe, and how those places and those people and those sort of situations and the manner of talking influence his writing so heavily, and how they make his themes of non-urbanized science fiction what they are. I'd never thought about it that way before, but in a short story collection you can definitely see that. Almost every single one here is non-urban, is rural America, and you can see how that background of his affects it. The author is very enthusiastic about Simak's stories and world building, and this introduction was probably going to be more valuable for someone who actually knows something about the United States. I really don't. The word Wisconsin springs to mind. There's a place called Coon Valley. There's another one called something similarly rural and outback, or whatever you call the outback in America. And I was pretty lost. I imagine that if you know the area, it would make a lot of sense. Francis Lyall talks about how Simak used places he knew in real life to help form the ones he writes about in his stories. Anyway, I would give the introduction 2 stars because I was lost for a lot of it, and though I did appreciate the enthusiasm whilst reading it, I reflected on the fact that once upon a time, before the internet, everything we got to know about an author came from one of those introductions. So that was interesting reflection. The first story is Neighbour. Neighbour is very much the sort of story mentioned in the intro because it's based in a small rural farming community, dirt farming. So you're never going to get rich from it, but it's a community, and there's this guy who's lived there all his life, and he talks about these new neighbours who come in. They buy a completely run-down place, they do it up, and they're doing really well. They're farming well, their corn is growing, they seem to get rain when no one else rains, and our protagonist one day happens to be over there at night looking for lost stock, cattle or whatever, and finds that the tractor plows all night on its own. So there's a lot of weird things. Now, this family claimed to have come from behind the Iron Curtain, which was a thing back in the day, but obviously they have come from much, much further away. This is a subtle, good story that maps the integration of these people into the community, with the community kinda knowing, not knowing, caring, not caring, that they probably aren't from anywhere nearby. It's got a pretty good conclusion. It's very Simak, very low key in terms of actual events. It's a sort of incident that someone else might write as this huge panic event, but Simak doesn't. He writes the slow integration, the humanity, the neighborliness, and it's kind of fun in a mild sort of way. I give Neighbor 3 stars. Okay, so the next story is Green Thumb. Green Thumb is another rural town, village, whatever, and our main protagonist is some sort of representative, maybe for seed companies or chemical companies, I'm not sure. Anyway, goes out to solve problems for his neighbors. One of his neighbors reported this huge cone of dirt that's just vanished out of the ground, though next to it there's a pile of sand. And other strange things accumulate, and this is basically, Green Thumb is a first contact story, but the first contact in question is with an intelligent plant. I like Green Thumb a lot. I'd give it a 3, maybe even a 3.5. Moving on from Green Thumb is Small Deer, which isn't on the piece of paper. So I was reading this in various locations. I made notes. Small Deer is a time machine based story, but it's narrated by someone who describes himself as a yokel who may not or may not be very intelligent. The colloquialism and language style is what it is, and he's writing a letter to someone to the university to tell him about what really exterminated the dinosaurs. We've been wrong the whole time. It wasn't any meteorite, and it was something that might come for us. I'd give Small Deer 3 stars because it was fun. After Small Deer, we have The Ghost of a Model T. This is a real tug at the heartstrings type story. It is a ghost story in a strange, speculative, never explained really sort of way. And there's a lot of, it's heavy on the nostalgia, and nostalgia for a place that isn't anymore, a rural place that isn't anymore. An old dance hall appears, and from the introduction we know that there actually was a place like this dance hall that's being described. So this one is a bit spoilery. There's an old man who's walking home from the pub having had the last beer of the night, and he's not looking forward to getting home because his old dog has just died and he feels lonely without his dog. All of a sudden, this Model T Ford, just like he owned when he was a young whippersnapper, comes up, the door falls open, and he gets in, and he goes on this long, long drive. He goes back to the ghost of this dance hall where he used to dance, and there's a whole heap of young people, and there's moonshine. He is still old as he is, and he meets people that he hasn't seen for a long time. And for the reader, you quite clearly figure out that this isn't a real thing that's really happening. I spent a lot of time thinking maybe this is one of those delusions that run through people's brains as they die. Maybe, maybe not. But there's definitely a ghost in this story. It's probably a better story for people who really, really like their cars, especially Model T Fords. I don't actually know what a Model T Ford would look like, though I can make some assumptions. I'm not a huge car person, and there's a lot of car in this story and a lot of driving around. It's a good story. I liked it overall, so I'd probably give it 2.5 stars. I feel like I have read this one before and then I've forgotten it because it wasn't really all that impactful for me. However, not a bad story, just not my story. It's a story for people who like old cars. Next, we have got Bite Your Tongue, with Byte spelt B-Y-T-E. I bet you can't read that. Oh well, you're just going to have to believe me. So, Bite Your Tongue is essentially a story about the imperative of dreams and how dreams will get you through. And the setting of it is political situation, glad handing, deals made, struck, etc., etc., and how that can go very wrong for people. What it's meant to be about, and what I suspect Simak thought it was about, and I imagine that when it was first published, what people thought it about was a future in which, hang on, when was it? Bite Your Tongue, copyright Random House, 1980. Oh, maybe not. That's later than I imagined. So a protagonist in this one is a computer, an AI, a something of that nature. He is called Fred. All the computers have those sort of names. I think one's called Gwen and one's called Andy, whatever. Oscar, there's an Oscar. And his job is in politics. I'm not sure if he's actually in Washington, but all the senators now have computers attached to them. And the computers don't actually have to work that hard, so they spend a lot of time gossiping. Anyway, our protagonist does something uncomputer-like, and the monitors catch him and he gets downgraded to somewhere else. It's dated poorly. It's dated poorly because the computers don't feel like computers. For 1980, the attempt to create a computer as a protagonist is actually quite clumsy, because by 1980 there were quite a few good cyberpunk stories out there. There was a lot of computer stuff, and computers weren't the computers we have today. And in that way, Simak is a bit prescient, because the prevalence of computers absolutely everywhere, doing everything and monitoring the suitability of a candidate to be elected and so forth. There's a complete restructuring of the electorates in America. It's all interesting, but the attempt to create the computer as a person, for me, fell completely flat. So I think this is one of the ones I've read before and has aged poorly. Fred is not a computer, it's a human. It's just a disembodied normal human who thinks and behaves like a normal human. It's not a bad story. It's a pretty good story for what it is. It's just the one that I would say has aged worst throughout here. Now, second last story is I Am Crying All Inside. On a far future Earth, we have a protagonist telling us about how he's hoeing the corn rows, and it's a really important job because the corn that comes from these rows is going to be made into, I think he just calls it moonshine. It's going to go into the still. There's other fields for corn that are for eating, but this one is for making alcohol. And through the colloquially difficult narration, we eventually learn that that he is a person, but not a folk. The folk are real people. The person or persons are actually robots, and there aren't very many of either of them. So humanity discovered the stars, and all the best humans got in starships and went off to the stars. The only ones they left behind were the ones that they judged not good enough, not worth being used to populate the galaxy, both in humans and in robots. So the robot is not very efficient, malfunctioning, emotive, weird, not very robot-like. I don't think Simak ever did robots very robot-like. I think he basically did them as humans. And we've got a grand, elegant house full of a few people who at one stage tell us that they were all the ones that used to live in falling down shacks in the swamps until everyone left, so they moved into the nice houses. It's these remnants of humanity that are basically the ones that no one wanted to take to the stars are difficult to read. And they're tended lovingly by the remaining robots, both the indoor robots and the outdoor robots. And this one is very rural in language. And I feel like between the vocabulary and the concepts, I think it's very American in ways that I don't quite follow. Perhaps if you are American and used to reading older stories, I got Mark Twain from it, Mississippi swamp stuff. rattlesnakes, cottonmouth snakes, something like that, etc. Yeah, I'm Crying All Inside is from 1969. I struggled with it because I couldn't really see through the narration to what was happening a lot of the time, and I ended up being a bit impatient with it. I think also I read these stories quite fast, not interspersed with other things. I think there was a little bit too much rurality for me overall. I don't think I got it. So that would probably be a 2-star read for me. And then Immigrant. Immigrant is the titular story of the collection. It is also, I think, the longest story. It is the only 4-star read for me in this collection. The other ones were sort of 3-ish, 2.5-ish. But Immigrant, I thought, was really good. We start off with a young man who is on a starship going to the planet of Kimnon, something beginning with K, Kimon. And we slowly learn that Kimon is this star that was discovered by accident when a spaceship crashed there, and the people eventually got rid of the spaceship, decided to stay, and sent letters to Earth saying that they were going to stay. How did they send it? Well, it's a mystery you'll have to discover for yourself. Kimon is described as an almost utopian planet. It's got its own indigenous population that's bipedal, upright, not too dissimilar from humans, but apparently amazingly more smart, beautiful, and advanced. Kimon accepts immigration from Earth, but only people who've got a certain IQ, have achieved certain things, have degrees, whatever. And our protagonist, Bishop, is regarded with envy and delight by everyone else on the starship as he goes. Once he gets there, he finds out that it's very much not what he expected. We are science fiction readers. We know that utopia very rarely means actually utopia. This one, is it a utopia or isn't it? Well, it's got a lot of utopia factors. All the Earthmen there live in this amazing hotel, and it's absolutely beautiful, and there's no money, but they all work. The one thing I don't like about it is Bishop, on his way to this planet where he knows there's no money and where he knows that the structure is completely different to Earth, somehow expects to get there and get a job and make money with his business degree that he got on Earth. I don't see how you could have an IQ of 160 or whatever it is and not figure out that none of that's going down. So yeah, anyway, he gets to this planet, and elements of it are utopian, elements are weird. He takes a job basically babysitting, and there's a lot of weird, funky stuff. Is this planet what it seems? Clearly not, because there's a whole story about it. But what happens? I'm not going to tell you. I just really like the narrative. In this one, as wasn't always the case with many of the others, as soon as I picked it up, I became immersed in the story, and I wanted to keep reading, and I wanted to read more. Unlike, say, The Ghost of a Model T, that I felt impatient with a few times, or I Am Crying All Inside, which I did at times find quite tedious. So, within this amazing little Mandarin book, you've got a whole heap of wonderful Simak stories, if you like Simak, which overall I do. I have to say, having finished this collection, I feel that he excelled more at full-length novels than at short stories. All the concepts are good. I just think I prefer his full-length novels. Overall, I would give Immigrant and Other Stories 3 out of 5 stars, because that's kind of the mean averaged out star rating that I gave to the stories. I do recommend to classic science fiction readers. I think you will enjoy it. Maybe pace yourself. Don't read them continuously like a book. That's one of the main reasons why I have trouble with short story collections. I read them continuously and it doesn't really work. Anyhow, thanks for watching. You know what I'm going to say? Am I going to say it? Maybe I won't say it this time. Of course I will. Read good books.